Thanks for joining a new approach to normalizing data webinar. My name is Jordan Leibovitz, and I'm part of the marketing team here at IMO. Before we get started, I want to take care of a few items for those attending. First off, this webinar is being recorded and will be available to you for future viewing. Throughout the session, all attendees will be in listen-only mode, and if you have any questions, please type them into the questions section on your GoToWebinar console. At the end of the presentation, we'll have a Q&A session as well, and we'll get to as many questions as we can, but if for any reason yours is not addressed, someone will be able to follow up with you after the presentation. We like to keep things interactive, so throughout the webinar, we'll be launching poll questions for you to answer. Today we have three presenters: Dr. Ross Martin, President at 360 Degree Insights, Rajiv Haravu, Senior Product Manager at IMO, and Denise Stromer, Product Manager at IMO. As mentioned before, if you have any questions or comments while our presenters are speaking, please type them into your GoToWebinar control panel. And with all of this being said, I would like to pass it over to Rajiv.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks, Jordan, for the opportunity to present. My name is Rajiv Haravu. I'm a Senior Product Manager here at IMO. My role here at IMO is I have the privilege and the honor to kind of launch new products. And IMO Precision Normalize, the product that we are going to talk to you today, is one such offering. A quick bio from my end: I've spent more than a decade and a half in health IT, working on health information exchanges, device informatics, research informatics, and most recently, I've been with IMO for the last 2 years. My role here on this webinar is to give you a grounding, a foundation on which our products are built, and give you an introduction to IMO. Many of you may know what IMO is and what it does, but I'm just going to start there. We are, a terminology company and a software company. We are both, and we have our offerings are used widely in the health IT ecosystem, most widely in the electronic health records, but also increasingly in other platforms, like health information exchanges and clinical data registries and enterprise data warehouses. So, but before we launch into IMO Precision Normalize, and I think on the next slide, I'd like to kind of give you a grounding on the foundation on which all of our products are built. The foundation on which all of our products are built is clinical interface terminology. And what does that mean? Why is that important for all our products is what I'd like to cover first. Clinical interface terminology, what we call clinical interface terminology, is essentially a very rich and large concept database. A clinical concept database that stretches across multiple domains. And by domains, I mean the concepts are relating to problems, relating to diagnoses, relating to medications, relating to clinical laboratory procedures, and much more. But at its core, to simplify everything to a single unit, at its core, there is a concept. There is a clinical concept, and there are different ways of describing that concept. So we recognize that physicians, different healthcare providers talk to their patients and describe concepts in different ways. So over the last 2.5 decades, what IMO has done is essentially collect and organize the different ways of describing a particular clinical concept. And those are essentially what's shown on the screen here. So you think of a clinical concept and all the different ways of different permutations and combinations you can actually use, a clinician has used in the past to describe a particular concept. And that clinical concept and everything underneath that, the common ways of describing that concept, are then mapped to a whole set of metadata. And that metadata, importantly, includes administrative mappings. That means it includes mappings to standard coding systems, but it also includes other metadata like age and gender, if it's applicable, and other very rich metadata that can be attached to that concept. So in the next slide, what we'll show you is, how this clinical interface terminology has been traditionally used. We, of course, got our start on the EHR platforms, and it is IMO clinical interface terminology across multiple domains is essentially used as the language through which a clinician documents a problem, a procedure, or a medication in an EHR. And the benefits of that has been it hides the complexity of a SNOMED coding system or an ICD-10 coding system or a CPT coding system from the clinician. The clinician does not have to be an expert on these coding systems. They could use commonly used terms for describing a particular problem or a diagnosis or a procedure. And then once they choose that within their EHR platforms, it can, or any other platform, all the mappings to the standard coding systems gets automatically done. So in this case, you can see that all that a clinician would need to do is choose breast cancer metastasized to pelvis, and you have all the complexity is hidden from the coding complexity is kind of hidden from the clinician. If they had to rely purely on a SNOMED, they would have to know 3 different SNOMED codes to be able to capture the granularity of what they want to capture about that patient. So traditionally, this has been this is what happens day in and day out across many EHR platforms in many different sites, as we'll show you in the next slide. So we are, this traditional mode of using IMO's clinical interface terminology this clinical interface terminology across many EHR platforms is used in 70% of the acute care facilities in the U.S. That translates roughly to 4,500 U.S. hospitals. So we have traditionally had a very wide install base for our clinical interface terminology in the U.S. and also many international locations. As we can show you in the next slide here, that our product portfolio has 2 aspects to it. One is terminology, the core terminology, the clinical interface terminology solutions that we talked about, and also insight solutions that are built on top of that core terminology, clinical interface terminology solutions that I talked about. And yes, we've been traditionally in the EHR space, but we recognize that the health IT ecosystem is more than just the EHR. And starting last year, we started to ask the question as to if our clinical interface terminology has applicability outside of the EHR platform, and that's where the IMO Precision Normalize journey begins. And as you can see, there are 2, as you can see in the next slide, that there are 2 fundamental questions that we asked as we started this journey last year. Number one, the first question was, does CIT, a clinical interface terminology, have applicability outside the EHR? And we saw that there was, and the answer to that was yes. And the reason for that was this particular statistic and similar statistics that we saw in the marketplace. There was definitely a need with the transition to value-based care. There was definitely a need for insights, but we were noticing that healthcare was data rich, but as is evidenced by this compound annual growth rate of healthcare data year over year through 2025, but we felt that there was a poverty of insights for that healthcare vendors, healthcare providers they're facing. And the biggest reason for the poverty of insights was the quality of the data. And what does data quality mean? As you all know, everybody on this call knows, it can mean a lot of things. Data quality could mean having a clear definition of identity of a patient that can be solved through complex master patient index algorithms that are out there. It could mean problems related to patient attribution. It could mean a whole slew of things. But the question in our mind was, if data quality is that barrier to good quality insights for healthcare vendors, whether they be clinical data registries, whether they be health information exchange vendors, or any other vendor outside of the EHR space, then where does IMO fit into that data quality puzzle, and how can we help solve that data quality puzzle? And the answer we felt was in terminology normalization, which is essentially the function of IMO Precision Normalize, the product that we are going to talk to you about today. We felt that there is over the 2.5 decades, we know that clinicians don't just use one term to describe a particular clinical concept. So there is a good deal of fragmentation in terms of how people describe a problem or a diagnosis or a medication or a laboratory. And we were well positioned to be able to kind of standardize those varied ways that somebody could describe a problem, diagnosis, medication, or a lab. So that's where we felt we were, with our concept database, we were well positioned to solve that little piece, very important piece of data quality. And then the question became to us that, yes, we can contribute to data quality efforts, but then the question was, what are the costs of data quality? And as you can see in the next slide, there are multiple costs of data quality are multiple. Here it's about financial costs of data quality. It is, if you're getting data from multiple sources into your data repository, and you're spending a lot of manual effort and time to clean up that data that's sitting in your data lake and sitting in your data warehouse, there's a financial cost to that. But there are also other non-financial costs that, as is evidenced by the next slide, is that there is the patient, there's a patient safety component to this cost to having dirty data in your data warehouse or a data repository. If you are, if you are doing analytics, and if you are doing reporting, or if you are doing quality improvement initiatives, then you are going to that's going to be affected by lack of standardization or lack of data quality, and more importantly for us, lack of standardization and terminology with regards to data quality. So that's essentially what we want to talk to you today about, how IMO Precision Normalize can help solve a very important puzzle for the data quality, which is standardizing the fragmented ways you can define problems, diagnoses, medication labs to a shared vocabulary, so that you set yourself up for doing good quality analytics and also drawing great insights from those analytics. With that, I will pause and hand it over to Jordan. I believe there's a poll question here, and we'd love to get some feedback from you. Jordan?
Awesome. Thanks, Rajiv. All right, if everyone could face their attention to your screen. In your organization, where does poor quality data have the biggest impact? A, clinical decisions, B, reimbursement, C, population health initiatives, or D, other quality improvement initiatives? Just going to give it a few seconds so you all have time to vote. All right. Rajiv, it looks like clinical decisions won this one. All right. Now I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Ross Martin.
And I will unmute myself and say hello. Well, thank you first, Rajiv, for teeing this up so nicely. I think my role in this is to talk about the role of health information exchange. In addition to my company, 360 Degree Insights, my primary client for the last few years has been CRISP, the Health Information Exchange for Maryland, DC, and West Virginia. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why I think the role of and the importance of having good clinical coding across domains in terms of what impact that can have on health information exchange and our users, the providers who are depending on our data. So just a little quickly about me. So I'm a medical informatician. 20 some years ago, I left practicing OB-GYN to work on medical informatics, did a fellowship in that in the late 90s, and have been doing pretty much full-time informatics, mostly data standards, data quality, data health information exchange, and electronic health record kind of stuff, and a lot of the meaningful use things that happened under the HITECH Act back in 2009 and beyond. My career has included time at Pfizer, Bearing Point, Deloitte, the American Medical Informatics Association as a staff member and a 20-year member, and then CRISP and my own company, my own consulting company. So just moving on. Just to give you a sense of what CRISP is about, the acronym is Chesapeake Regional Health Information System for our patients, but we pretty much go by CRISP, sort of like IBM does. We primarily are the state designated entity or the state designated health information exchange from Maryland. We also received that same designation recently for the District of Columbia. We are also the infrastructure for the West Virginia Health Information Network, or the WIN. The V is silent. And in addition, we do reciprocity data sharing with the Delaware Health Information Network into Delaware, back and forth between our borders. If you take that little Delaware piece and stick it right over here on the side of Maryland, that's where that fits. And Virginia, we also do some similar connections with Virginia. So we cover a lot of domain. We have about 20 million patient lives in our master patient index. You can, if you look in the next thing, slide, it just talks a little bit about why we do what we do. We're a not-for-profit organization serving this region that we serve. And we try to be a catalyst for better health and better information flow through cooperation and collaboration. And that really is the way we do this. Is we're governed by our members, the participants, the hospitals, and the healthcare providers who use us basically tell us where they want us to go. We get a lot of funding from the state. We get funding from the hospitals that are members and some of the payers that participate. The ambulatory providers and others do not pay us. And so between state and federal grants and that, we were able to do this. We do things in an incremental fashion. And so a lot of the things that we built over the last 12 years have been a piece at a time and have grown, and that has had an impact on data quality. I would look at the kind of constellation of different health information exchanges out there and say that we are on the side of high volume data flow, and there are institutions like Indiana Health Information Exchange and Regenstrief, the not-for-profit research institute that started Health Information Exchange in the 70s, actually, in Indiana. They started normalizing data right from the beginning. In fact, if you've heard of LOINC codes, the ones that are used for laboratories and other codes that aren't in like SNOMED and CPTs and et cetera, they invented that code because they needed it to exist, and it became a standardized code. So they're, from the beginning, they were doing a lot of normalization of data, and we kind of were more about moving data. And that has had some impacts, and this is why I think that this is a conversation worth having. And if you can just move on to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about what that's meant for us. We built a bunch of different things, starting with just a portal for people to see clinical documents and clinical data. And that was, we used Mirth, which was an open source platform. We used that for a number of years, and that's sort of the orange spot of this. And you can see that over time, back in 2018, we started decommissioning the use of Mirth directly and started doing single sign-on so that people didn't have to log into us separately, but they could do it within the context of being in their EHR, and they'd see a button for CRISP, and then they would be immediately sent, looking at the patient they were looking at in their electronic health record in the CRISP content, sharing data from other hospitals and other health systems and other ambulatory providers. Then we started doing this thing, the Unified Landing Page, or ULP, and that also just aggregated a bunch of stuff. And you can see that our numbers of users and queries and things ticked up quite a bit. Eventually, we started embedding these in through application interfaces, APIs, embedding these into electronic health records. And that, again, accelerated the growth and the number of queries. And you can see this last thing, this red line, which goes with the right axis here, was FHIR-based resources. Some of you may have heard of the HL7 Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources, or FHIR, is the new standard for basically webifying data content in healthcare and making it so that you don't have to be a healthcare aficionado to know how to write code to interact with somebody else's system. And that has proven to be an incredible accelerator for getting data into the hands of people. And this has real implications about data quality too, because now we're not presenting it as documents, we're presenting it as more discrete data, and yet we are not normalizing it in a meaningful way. If you can go on. So you can just kind of appreciate from that, and also from this next slide, about the volume of what we're dealing with. And this is actually not that recent data. I didn't bother updating it so much because it just changes so quickly, but we're probably up to more like 5 million encounter alerts. That means somebody has one of your patients has shown up in an emergency room or had been admitted to the hospital, and we send out about 4 million of those per month. And that's based on receiving now well over 20 million ADT, or admission discharge transfer messages, over on the right. We receive over 20 million of these per month, these little messages that say where a patient is and what their admitting complaint was, what their discharge diagnosis was. We also get lab reports and radiology reports, lots of transcribed reports, in the millions. We have hundreds and hundreds of places sending us data on a daily basis, including basically all the radiology providers in the state of Maryland and DC, and then all the major labs, and again, about 18 million or 19 million patients in our master patient index of people that we know about. So that volume has some real implications, especially when you think about, well, what happens when there's redundant data across sites? And if you go on to the next slide, we can, I want to just talk about what some of the role I play at CRISP. I'm the program director now. I've done a lot of different things at CRISP over the years, but actually Monday was my 5th anniversary of being with CRISP. And in those years, I've had many different roles, but now the last couple of years, I've really been focusing on research only and helping clinicians and researchers get access to data to understand impact. And that started back in 2016. It's taken a lot of legal work to get this approved. And now we've got about 20 studies that are live and working and providing data. And this, again, if you have disparate data sources, all coding things differently, your ability to make sense of the data, while it's a much richer data set than many of the researchers would have available otherwise, and we've even seen like as much as 50% more understanding of things like how admissions or being aware of things, even after doing traditional interviews with patients and the typical ways you do these types of studies in consented studies. They're seeing much more data available through CRISP. But if the data are not of sufficient quality that you can glean those insights, you don't have the fidelity that you need to really come up with the answers that you need. Go on to the next slide, please. So I wanted to just really briefly touch on, of course, everybody's had to deal with the pandemic and COVID-19. In those first few months in March and April, we were working because we do so much for the state and for the district and for West Virginia already, and they depend on us for many of their critical data sources. We went into overdrive. We actually helped set up their drive-through testing facilities, where we've set up a lot of their track trace activities, especially in Maryland, and all of this has required that people are depending on this data every day. And of course, because, for example, initially there were no codes for COVID-19 testing. So the labs were coming in weird ways, and we had to deal with that and just use, whatever text came in to try to decipher that, oh, this is a SARS-CoV-2 test. We need to, is it an antibody test? Is it an active infection test? A CPR test? What type of test is it? We had to be able to elucidate that. Link codes were quickly created to alleviate that, but they didn't all get deployed in the same fashion, so we're still having to deal with some of that. And it really highlights, one, the importance of health information exchange, both for active care and for population health, but also for care coordination, public health issues, so much, and just knowing what your priorities should be and where we are in a state of the pandemic in the region. These are all essential things that we have to know and have to know quickly. Normalization of data is critically useful for that. If you go on to the next slide. And this is just one example. We in addition to so many other things, we started doing things like hospital trend lines and very detailed information about ICU beds and normal beds, and which were COVID use and which were other things, which admissions were related to COVID. Again, challenging to do without quality in the data. And you can go on to the next. And this is just one example of many reports we had to do. So in terms of our overall strategy as an organization, CRISP has been trying to go from this incremental approach of, we'll build something, it's valuable to you, but you have to log in 5 different ways, to trying to go to single sign-on, that's unified landing page, embedded services, where you may not even know that it's a CRISP asset that you're looking at, but you're using it because it's embedded in your workflow. That's really where we're trying to go. And the next level to that is truly the learning health system, getting that feedback loop that includes research, but also quality improvement activities, other care coordination things, where our data informs us about where to go from here. And we've seen COVID has accelerated that need to such an extreme degree, because we're all depending upon good information to make the right decisions. So what are the implications of all this? And if you can go on the next. Obviously, I've tried to speak to this as I've been talking about the basics of CRISP, but we all face challenges with health information exchanges, face challenges with data quality. When you think about the data quality challenges that drive, I think it's something like 80 or 90% of the hospital systems that use CRISP also use IMO in their own systems to do their own data normalization. But everybody does it in a different way, and having that unified view would be extremely useful. So you multiply the challenges that a single institution has in the HIE space, and you multiply it by the hundreds and hundreds of entities that are sending us data. So having an ability to tap into both knowing how these things map to common terminologies and having somebody else do that. CRISP will never be smart enough at this. I know Frank and his team have been working on this for over 20 years, and they are truly experts in this terminology services. And so we can't replicate that. But if we can build onto that, I know, and I'll, again, just in full disclosure, CRISP has had conversations with IMO over the last few years, just saying, what can we do to help with these problems? And when I heard about the new precision tool, I thought now is the time for us to really dive in and think about what this looks like, especially since we know that our customers are using IMO and they kind of want this feedback loop to happen. So when you don't have good data quality, one of the things you just fundamentally can't do are things like data visualization and trending, so that somebody can look at the stuff more efficiently and not have to go through document after document or table after table and try to make sense of it themselves. But we can't really bring it together in a consistent view unless we know that it's saying the same thing, that we're comparing apples to apples, for example. So all of these things lead us to say data quality good, data normalization essential to going to this next level of both research, quality improvement, full care coordination, building insights on the fly. These are all things that are fundamental to us improving the lives of the people that we're responsible for through health information exchange. And this is just really summarized in this final slide. And this final, if there's one take-home message, it's critical for all we do. And so, and what I've experienced from IMO over the past more than a decade of knowing about the company, it's a critical solution for this type of problem.
So I'm next. Hello, my name is Denise Stormer, and I'm the IMO Precision Normalize product manager. I have worked in the healthcare product management as a healthcare product manager for over 10 years, and spent the last 5 years focusing on interoperability. And I've also, like Rajiv, been with IMO for 2 years. So IMO's built a normalization engine that takes inconsistent, incomplete, and inaccurate data from the problem, procedure, medication, and medication domains where lab is really part of the procedure domain, and it returns clinically validated terms and mappings. There are three common use cases we talk about for IMO Precision Normalize. First is quality reporting. With quality reporting, Normalize can match to the most specific IMO term, and with that supply all of the primary and secondary mapped codes, thus enabling more accurate analytics like those needed for MIPS and MACRA. Second is interoperability, what Ross was talking about. With interoperability, Normalize can again match to the most specific term and supply all the primary and secondary codes. But with those codes, a more specific and accurate health record is shared. A secondary benefit for interoperability could be identifying the terms from a patient's record that are the same and the terms that are different, enabling reconciliation of the patient record. And then third is documentation improvement and code set maintenance. IMO continually maintains its concept database. It updates it 6 times a year. It is the most up-to-date, correct, and compliant database. With that, customers can always count on the most up-to-date documentation and mapped codes, greatly improving their quality. With that, we're ready to ask our second poll question.
Awesome. If everyone could turn their attention to the screen. Which of the 3 use cases would be most valuable for your organization? Quality, interoperability, or documentation improvement and code set maintenance? Give it a few seconds so you all have time to answer. Okay. All right, it's looking like interoperability is really taking the lead here. Go ahead and close out, and back to you, Denise.
Thank you. So there are three basic features of IMO Precision Normalize. The first is coverage and knowledge base, which is our IMO concept database, and that has been built and curated, as everyone has said, for over 20 years. And this is truly the differentiator for IMO Precision Normalize. It covers the problem, procedure, and medication domains where the lab data is included in the procedure domain. It houses over 2.4 million term synonyms and 32,000 substitutions. Substitutions are things like acronyms, plus 250,000 mapped codes covering 21 medical specialties. It covers all major common code systems. The second is the algorithm, and like the concept database, IMO has been building matching algorithms for many years. The IMO Precision Normalize algorithm has been developed on top of up-to-date technology, specifically the Elasticsearch engine. It has been tuned and validated by physicians, and this is also really a differentiator because we believe that machine learning alone will not get us to where we want to be in terms of matching. There is a very high probability that it will match any given data to one of our term synonyms and not need human review, thus reducing the manual effort for our clients. It can normalize only codes, it can normalize only descriptions, and any combination of the two. And the third feature is the ability to handle both batch and transactional processing. So batch processing is where we get a set of terms and they come in a file. And we're noting here that our throughput is up to 300,000 terms a minute. And basically it gives you results as quickly as possible. Transactional processing is an API where we expect to receive a smaller set of data than with batch processing. And for example, we might receive data for a single patient. So transactional is able to perform at speeds fast enough for real-time use. So with this slide, I want to show details that explain how data normalization works with IMO Precision Normalize. When data is extracted from diverse health information systems and aggregated, like Ross described, the resulting data set is highly inconsistent and varied. If we look at the data on the left, we have 4 problems that exemplify the kind of data we typically see. And if you look to the right, we see the IMO ID and description that matches those terms. So if we dig in a little bit, in the first example, we see an ICD-9 code 174.9, and the description breast cancer, comma, stage 3, and in parentheses, the 174.9. In the second example, we see an ICD-10 code, C50919, and a description stage 3 breast cancer, comma, unspecified laterality. And then in the third, a SNOMED code, 254837009, and that is malignant neoplasm of breast, comma, stage 3. And then finally, in the fourth example, there's no code specified, and we have stage III breast and the letter CA. The 3 I's, of course, are representing the number 3, and CA stands for cancer. And all 4 terms match IMO's 444-199-14, malignant neoplasm of breast, comma, stage 3. But the inconsistent representation of this condition within an IDN or health analytics platform would not only make it difficult to identify patients who have malignant neoplasm of breast stage 3, but would also make it difficult to analyze cost or quality of outcomes associated with this problem. IMO Precision Normalize is able to standardize each piece of data to a common definition and meaning represented by an IMO ID. And that takes us to what we do with that. So with this slide, I want to explain the data that's added and want to stress that this really completes and enriches the data set. And this is what allows for deeper analysis. So after IMO Precision Normalize correctly matches a term, then it supplies all primary and secondary standard codes for ICD-10, ICD-9, and SNOMED. It supplies the HCC and MCC flags, community and institution factor risk adjustments, and demographic data. And so as described on the last 2 slides, IMO Precision Normalize enriches and improves the data quality. This better data can support clinical and financial decision making. It powers clinical insights in several ways. It reconciles data from multiple systems, making it consistent. Plus, it enriches the data, making it complete. The data dictionary Normalize is built on top of, that we've been talking about, has been created and curated by clinical subject matter experts, producing the most accurate terms and codes. And as I've said earlier, the breadth and depth of the data will better support quality improvement and population health initiatives. It also improves quality reporting. As stated earlier, it's built on top of our data dictionary of over 2.4 million term synonyms that enable the precise matching. After matching, as I said earlier, it maps the clinical terms to the standard codes. The supplied codes and metadata work more accurately with value sets to facilitate deeper clinical and financial insights. And finally, Normalize operates most efficiently and correctly. As stated earlier, the content that's built on top of is updated 6 times a year to be the most up-to-date, correct, and compliant. It batch processes up to 300,000 terms a minute, producing results as quickly as possible. And there's a very high probability that Normalize will find an exact synonym, thus reducing the need for human verification. So now we're going to ask one final poll question.
Thanks, Denise. All right, one more question. Are you interested in learning more about IMO Precision Normalize? I'm going to give it a few seconds before I end it and we go into Q&A. All righty. I'm going to go ahead and close out. Thank you. Okay, at this time, we'll be kicking off Q&A. If you have any questions from today's webinar or questions coming in about IMO Precision Normalize or just normalization of data in general, please enter them now, and our team will begin answering them live. As we start receiving your questions, please excuse any brief silence for our team to review and answer.
And Denise, I've been taking a look at a question that came in, and I'm assuming it's to me because it's about IRB approval, and so I'm assuming it's about the research elements of it. So I was starting to write down a question, but essentially, if it's okay, I can just ask the question or state the question, and I'll post it also as well in the text. But it's asking, with data from so many sources, which institution gives IRB approval? And I'm assuming that's for research. That's from Frank Fenner. So in the case of CRISP, I think this would depend on the governance for the data sources, but in the case of CRISP, we received regulatory approval from the state of Maryland to add research as an approved use. We had to add that also into our participation agreement. So every entity that works with CRISP and shares data with CRISP has to sign this participation agreement that includes now research as a use case, and they're basically consenting under particular approved uses, according to our governance, the ability to share this. The institution that is supporting the researcher, or the researcher's institution, is the IRB that generally does the approval, and they have to understand where the data are coming from. In some instances, we do have to get approval from the state for certain sources of data that come from the state. For example, what in Maryland is called the HSCRC case mix data. It's data that's submitted every month to the state for the purposes of managing this thing called the waiver. And we manage that data. And so there's a couple of IRBs that have to give approval there. In addition, CRISP, as the research subcommittee of CRISP's clinical committee, has to approve the uses of the data as fitting under one of our approved use cases, things like consented studies, where patients consent for their data to be used, or non-consented studies where it's de-identified to a sufficient level that is deemed acceptable. So those are, that's a long-winded answer to a short question, but that was what I wanted to share about that.
So I think, Jordan, there's a question out there from Barbara Moe. I'm just going to read out the question. To paraphrase it, assuming that the synonyms go beyond code description synonyms to synonyms that clinician may use. I think the answer is yes. What IMO Precision Normalize is designed to do is to be able to take a description that a clinician may have used at the point of care, or and to be able to find, we can get that description devoid of any codes that are attached to it, and we can, because of our concept database, because we have such a rich concept database, we are able to, there's a good chance that we will be able to find a match for it and map it to the necessary administrative mapping that, as you may recall, we talked about metadata that's attached to the to our entries in the concept database. We can take your description that the clinician has used. We can find an appropriate match in our concept database, and then we can return to you not only the match but all the metadata. That means all the standard code mappings and other metadata that's attached to that mapping back to you as a customer or user.
It looks like a question came in. Which EHR does IMO Precision Normalize work in?
So I would say that we are EHR agnostic.
Awesome.
Right. I think just to add to what Denise said, and Denise is absolutely right. IMO Precision Normalize is an attempt to be completely agnostic and not tied to a single platform. So we could, we have our services, whether the APIs and the other services that we talked about. We can consume data from pretty much any platform and be able to find matches to those descriptions or codes that you can send us for normalization. I think there's another question here that says, how does data get normalized when it is missing a code? If you think back to the beginning of the presentation, and I talked about IMO's concept database. Again, we've documented and systematically organized in our concept database different ways that a clinician can actually describe a procedure or a problem or a diagnosis or a medication or lab or an immunization for that matter, for anything there. So the concept database in itself, there are two things to it. One is that that 2.5 decades of collecting that information from thousands of hospitals across the U.S. and many hospitals across the world, gives us almost a distinct advantage to be able to take a description that a clinician has used and be able to find a match. So the concept database in itself, the richness of the concept database in itself, is we are able to find a clinically equivalent match and give you all the mappings to that. The second thing is the description may have abbreviations, it may have spelling mistakes, it may have acronyms in there. So when Denise was talking about fuzzy matching algorithms that are part of IMO Precision Normalize, we recognize that it's not going to come in a nice little sentence to us or nice little code to us. There are going to be it's going to come to us in certain imperfect ways, and our fuzzy matching algorithms they account for that and find the best possible match that we can in our concept database. So there are two things. One is the richness of the concept database, which is essentially a documentation of the very different ways somebody could describe something, is one advantage. Two is the algorithms itself, which take into account that there could be imperfections in the way a description is entered at the point of care, and is able to account for it to find an appropriate match. I think those two go into finding a match even in the absence of a code.
I know there was a question in the Q&A section about what subject matter expert panels and group specialty societies are used.
Yeah, I think we have a good chunk of, I'll take a shot at answering the question here, is a good chunk of IMO is our informaticists that are here, and clinical informaticists, people who have clinical backgrounds, whether it's physicians, whether it's nurses or pharmacists, who keep on top of, or who interface with standards organizations that publish the standard standard code sets, whether it be SNOMED or ICD-10 or CPT, or whatever the case may be, whatever code set may be, and we keep on top of the changes, and we make that metadata I talked about that are attached to these IMO concepts, we consistently and constantly update them based on our interactions with those bodies that actually publish those code sets. So that could be anywhere between 4 to 6 times a year, depending on the domain. And I think that's what our clinical informaticists are experts at and are trained to do. In terms of the languages, we support English. The only language we support at launch is English. How often, there's a question out there, so how often do I need to update my data that we are normalizing? We don't mandate to a customer how often they need to update the data, but we do publish our terminology, our concepts and the mappings are updated 4 to 6 times a year. And I think we also have within Precision Normalize, Precision Normalize has the bulk functionality that can, and also it's a high throughput, was designed as a high throughput solution. That means you could push through millions of records through it, and have a very short turnaround time. You're not talking about days, or you're not talking about weeks. You're talking about minutes, and maybe a little bit more if the data sets are large. So even if we push out 4 to 6 updates a year to our terminology, clinical interface terminology, that means mappings to different coding systems, any other metadata that needs to be updated. and you could use the IMO Precision Normalize functionality, the high throughput algorithms that you have, and set up a cadence where you could choose whether you want to do it twice a year or 4 times a year. But we don't mandate it, but at least we require that at least one update is advisable, but it's largely dependent on the comfort level of our customers. But with IMO Precision Normalize, because it's a high throughput solution, I think it takes a very short amount of time to kind of process millions and millions of records. So it's we would recommend that you update as often as you can, so that you have the latest mappings in your data repository.
This is just a reminder, if you have any additional questions today, please enter them now. Otherwise, we are going to wrap up very shortly.
So I see a question, can IMO concept mappings be browsed similar to how hierarchies can be browsed via SNOMED browsers? I have not tried that, but I don't see why not. It comes in a text file, and so I don't see why that couldn't be done.
There's another question here. Do you require input to be text to then normalize them? Are old code sets kept for reference? The answer is we do keep old code sets for reference. The answer is yes. So for example, for our problem and diagnosis domain, there are mappings to ICD-9 as well as ICD-10. And I think one thing I'll take this opportunity to kind of add to Denise's presentation is that yes, I gave you an example of having mappings to ICD-9 and having ICD-10, which is more current. But also that's going backward, but also going forward, if ICD-11 came about and you had mappings to these IMO concepts, then you're also kind of future-proofing yourself. So if ICD-11 came out, you would go through a normal update cycle, conceptually, and you would get those ICD-11 mappings too. So I just wanted to kind of bring that up. I don't know if that we mentioned that to you. Also, the other part of the question is, do you require the input to be text to then normalize them? We don't. The inputs could be text, so it could be short phrases of descriptions of problem, diagnoses, procedures, or medications or labs. Or if you have, it's possible because we are used IMO concepts and the associated IDs are used in so many EHR platforms. Every major EHR platform out there, we could get an IMO. You could just get an IMO ID, and that's the easiest for us to kind of normalize because we know our IDs better than anybody else. We could also get a SNOMED code or an ICD code or an ICD-10 PCS code, and we could normalize those. So it doesn't have to be a text string. It can be a text string. It could be a standard code like SNOMED, ICD-10, CPT, LOINC, or RxNorm. Or it could be a combination of both, as Denise mentioned. So we could take any combination of that to normalize them.
I wanted to add just a tiny bit, and so we do know that there's historic data in the data sets, and I know Rajiv said that we do work with historic data as well as current data and the forward data.
Okay, it looks like questions are being wrapped up. So I think we're going to go ahead and close out for today. We hope you found the information in today's webinar useful. If you want any more information about IMO Precision Normalize, please contact your IMO client executive or email sales@imo-online.com. I hope everyone stays safe and healthy out there and have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.